Okay, so just some reminders where we are. It's recording, right? So just some reminders of where we are in terms of our course. So the learning outcomes that we have been focusing on is primarily with number one, to develop your ability, your critical awareness of the history of comparative literature, the divergent schools of thought, and their fundamental differences. So there are many schools of thoughts of comparative literature. We started by looking at the European, the Anglo-American, and then you yourselves have started to go beyond that, right? When you are doing assignment 1, the video essay that you're doing this week, you've started to look at other schools of thoughts, the Chinese schools of thoughts, maybe the Indian schools of thoughts, and others, right? The Turkish school of thought was brought up today. So learning outcome number 1, you will demonstrate how well you have reached this learning outcome by submitting video essay number 1. Okay, the first assignment, which is due this Friday. So once you're done with that, and I will grade you, I assume you have achieved the first learning outcome. Then the second learning outcome, and the third learning outcome, and the fourth learning outcome, they will be part of your 2/3, the last 2/3 of your course, when you start to apply, when you start to look at novels and how these novels can be read comparatively in the discipline of comparative literature. So you've done the first 5 weeks looking at the theory, the historical development, the fundamental differences. Week 6, which is next week, we are focusing on what we call here the parameters. Here, parameters. Parameters meaning the methodology or the approach that we take, right, to study any 2 texts. How do we go about doing that, right? So the idea is basically taken from many references, but one of which is Susan Bassnett's 1993 book, Comparative Literature, A Critical Introduction. Okay, she uses the word parameters in that book, and that kind of like stuck to our discussion. Okay, so what I mean by parameters can be interpreted as the methodology, the how to do comparative literature. Okay, so and this week 6, you are looking at The Yellow Bird, isn't it Birds? By Kevin Powers, which is Kevin Powers is an American novelist, 21st century American novelist. The novel is a war narrative. If you like the genre of the novel, it's a war narrative. It's a war story. Okay, it's in the 21st century from the American canon, but the context, the war, is the Iraqi war of the 21st century. The second novel is The Corpse Washer by an Iraqi writer, Sinan Antun. So you've got 2 writers. One is American, another one is from Iraq. But both are the same because the context of both stories are the same. War narrative, 21st century, Iraq context. So both novels are looking at the same context, the same setting, if you like, right? So it's the same setting, 2000 war in Iraq. One is told from the outsider's perspective. The Yellow Birds is told from the outsider's perspective. Another one, the insider's perspective. right? Sinan Antun is from the Iraqi perspective. Okay, so I want to establish this very clearly. So when you decide later what text to choose, you must realize that the similarity is very, very important. The two texts can come from two different literary contexts, from two different geographical contexts, from two different cultural contexts. But there must be something that is similar, that is converging between them. Otherwise, you cannot compare the two texts. So this is key. This is very, very important. Okay. So for this discussion, for this week's discussion, we're looking at comparative literature and the national literary canon. So both texts are considered as the national literature for their tradition, for their country. The Yellowbird, from the American USA's literary canon, the Corpse Washer from the Iraqi literary canon. Just a side note, the Corpse Washer was written in Arabic and translated into English. Okay, so we are not reading the text in original, we're reading it in translation. So Elia, your argument for your first video essay, you may consider your own experience of reading a text in translation as an example, as an illustration for your own understanding of why it is important for translated text to be allowed to be part of the pedagogies of comparative literature, especially in the 21st century, especially in a non-native context. Okay. So that's the first thing to talk about. I just want to kind of make comparison between week 6 and week 7. What's the difference between week 6 and week 7, right? Both texts in week 6 and both texts in week 7, they are novels from their own literary canon. From the American literary canon, you have two. One is The Yellowbird by by Kevin Powers for week 6. Then you have The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, also from the US, also from the Americans literary canon. Okay, the difference is Kevin Powers is part of the white majority, right? Angie Thomas is part of the African American literary canon. So she falls within the thematic focus of voices from the margins. That's the difference. Okay, so same corpus, same literary text can be read from different perspectives. Trevor Noah is from the majority, from the Black majority in South Africa, but the novel was set during the time of apartheid, in which the Black majority were marginalized in their own country, were the subaltern in their own country, right? Were victimized in their own country. So that's why voices from the margins. Okay, so you've got two stories. One is a story from somebody from the minority group, the African American. Another one from the majority group, the Black South African, right? But he is part of the minority because of apartheid. So I want you to see the distinction. Minority sometimes means small numbers, but minority can also mean the political license is weaker compared to the dominant power. Okay, I hope that's clear. So let's get started on. Okay, so I want you to open this. I sent you the I sent you this link on the WhatsApp, right? So I want you to open to the link. I will be going through excerpts from this book, okay? Primarily from chapter 1 and 2, maybe a little bit from chapter 3, just taking taking excerpts from it. So when I give you the page number, you can refer to the actual text, okay? And I've also given you this lecture notes, what we're going to be talking about today. So please open it up, and if you want to write notes, if you want to make extra notes there in the notes section, please feel free to do that. Okay, so you go to the notes section at the bottom here. If you see this, you can go to the notes section and then you can type stuff in, so that's how you make the lecture notes your own. Okay, so the lecture notes are there given to you. If you want to add to it as you're listening to me, you can do that. Okay, so here we go. So, like I said, this lecture is the introduction to the parameters, how to conduct comparative literature. And of course, based on all the scholars that we have read, from Henry Remack to Tosi, to Spivak, to all the other writers that you have read yourself, one thing is true, one thing remains true, is the methodology is your choice. You get to decide, right? There are many ways to approach comparative literature. And even then, scholars are arguing whether or not this is considered comparative literature. There's always someone who is arguing that your approach is not comparative literature, right? So all that aside, we started our course in the first week with this particular quotation. I want to come back to this quotation just to remind us, right? What is it that we are doing, and why is it necessary? Why is it important? Okay, so this is a quote from Matthew Arnold, which is in Susan Bassnett's book, the link that I gave you. So you can have a look in that, page 1. The first opening page, in which Matthew Arnold says, and is quoted by Susan Bassnett, quote, "Everywhere there is connection, everywhere there is illustration. No single event, no single literature is adequately comprehended except in relation to other events, to other literatures." So this is super crucial for us to kind of realize. Just a second, I just want to get the. So it's super crucial for us to realize that in order to adequately comprehend, okay, in order to adequately understand, comprehend, have a grasp of something, you need to make that text relational. You need to make that text that you are trying to understand relational to another text. So this is what Matthew Arnold is saying. But he's also, of course, not just saying about literature, he's also talking about events, right? He's talking about events, so not just literature. So this is something crucial. I just also want to start by having certain context. When you think about a writer, this week we're looking at Kevin Powers, we're looking at Sinan Antun. What are some conditions that affect the writer himself? Some key conditions would be his background, his race, ethnicity, nationality, his background. Another key condition would be historical events. What are some historical events that influenced him? In the case of both writers, the invasion of the US Army on Iraqi sovereign soil, right? The invasion by this outsider into Iraq, and how both writers, Kevin Powers and Sinan Antun, how they were affected by it and how they responded to it through their craft, through the art of storytelling. Okay, so that's the similar historical event. Then you have differences. They've got cultural differences, linguistic differences. They are influenced by different aspects, right? Both writers. They have different political belief. Kevin Powers participated in the war on Iraq, he was a soldier in 2003, 2004. So his political belief indicates that he agrees with the US government to invade a sovereign nation like Iraq. So that is a statement in itself, right? So when you read that book, The Yellow Birds, ask yourself, what is the political belief of the writer and how does that get reflected in the novel? Sinan Antun, an Iraqi, he loves his country. He's part of the land of Iraq, the heritage, the civilization of Iraq. And how does he capture that? What is his political belief in terms of this invasion, this outside invasion? Then you have religion, you've got family, you've got public institutions like education, like upbringing, like values, other values. So all these are conditions that affect the writer. So you have to remember, in this case, you're not just looking at one writer, you're looking at two writers, right? And every writer, both writers, have a whole set of conditions that affect them. Okay, so this is something you need to be mindful of, especially when you're thinking about your own text that you want to choose for your second assignment, for your final project. Then another thing that we also have to keep in mind, at the beginning of our analysis of these novels, is what are the conditions that affect me as the reader. These are just some basic conditions. You've got the gender, your gender. It so happens that both of you are female in this class today. So being female, reading these novels written by these male writers, and the protagonists for both novels are male. Being female, you read this, do you have some ideas or some issues that you want to take with the novels? Simple thing is both are set in a war context. Would a woman go to war? Would a woman leader go to war? Or is this something that, only male authority figures have this need to conquer another land, have this need to go and bulldoze someone else's home, in the name of democracy and civilization and all that, So you as a female reader, you may have some opinions, right? And then there are female characters in the story as well. So you may have certain opinions about that. Your education, you are graduate students. You're being trained to read the text in this particular way. You're being trained to resist colonialist ideas and ideologies. You've gone through courses, theory courses with Dr. Shan and other courses that trains the way you think. You are not thinking you are not just being, to quote the reference that Cherish used just now, Shizu's paper. You're not just a tool for receiving information, but you are a subject with your own thinking. You have your own thinking, right? So you have to exercise that, especially when you're reading the novels. And you also have to ask yourself, what other literary texts have you read that affects your worldview? Maybe you have read other war narratives. Maybe you have watched other war movies, right? And that colors the way you think about war narratives and what to expect about war narratives, okay? And of course, exposure to society at large. I'm sure in 2000, how old were you in 2000? Maybe very, very young, huh? How old were you? Are you like at school yet?
If 2000, 3 years old.
You were 3 years old. So 2003, the invasion of Iraq, 2003. So you were 6 years old. So you were too young to know the consequence of what was happening in the world. But today, as 20-year-olds, you look at the situation, you must have an opinion, right? Society has an opinion, you must have an opinion. So when you read that novel, you are exposed to society's opinion, but you are also forming your own. Maybe your parents, your family members, your friends, your teachers, they held an opinion about what was happening in Iraq. Is it ethical? Is it human? Should we do something like this? Should the world step in and stop America from going in the pretense of taking out a dictator, Saddam Hussein? You know, on that pretense, you kill so many civilians, you demoralize the nation state, a sovereign state, right? An independent sovereign state. So society will also have an opinion. So when you triangulate, when you put these things together, the information about the author, the information about the work that you are studying, and the information about yourself as the reader, when you triangulate, when you do a triangulation of it, you know, you have the author on the one hand, you have the novel that you are reading, all right, the work, and then you have the reader. So when you triangulate, when you make this kind of a triangulation, this is what Hans Robert Jauss, the theorist for reader response theory, this is what he has to say. So I just want to take some aspects of this quotation in order to, okay, never mind. Sorry, the quotation is missing some parts. Yeah. All right. Okay, better. So I just want to focus on certain key excerpts or key phrases from Hans Jauss' words, okay? And I quote, in the triangulate of author, work, and public, the last is no passive part, no chain of mere reactions, but rather itself an energy formation of history. So that's just preamble. The historical life, okay. The historical life of a literary work. A literary work has history. Author publishes it, but even before that, what is the history behind that literary work? The historical life of the literary work is unthinkable. Why? It's unthinkable without the active participation of the addressee, without you. So the work and how much it can benefit, how much it can contribute, what it can tell you is only as valuable as your active participation, meaning you as the reader, you need to actively participate. Okay, so this is what we are trying to do. We're trying to actively participate in the reading of these two novels for this week. For it is only through the process of its mediation that the work enters into the changing horizon of expectation. Okay, this is an important term, of a continuity in which the perpetual inversion occurs from simple reception to critical understanding, from passive to active reception, from recognized as static norms to a new production that surpasses them. So I'm connecting it back to what Shizu said in the article that Cherish picked up on. We need to stop becoming tools of receiving information like a sponge. You just absorb. Everything other people tells you, you just accept it. No, we need to become more active, right? We need to become more active. So the words, the key words, we need to be more active, right? We need to engage. We need to be critical. All right. So that's the role of the reader. And that is part of the way we approach a literary work. Okay, so that's the important part about that quote. So this idea of horizon of expectation, and this is a quote from Jingfeng Zhang 2013, the article in this journal. So what is this idea of horizon of expectation? So just now, Zhao's statement talks about the changing horizon of expectation, of a continuity in which simple becomes critical, passive becomes active, movement of the reader's participation, right, in the engagement with the literary work. So this is a quote. As the core concept of reception theory, horizon of expectations refer to the sets of expectations against which readers perceive the text. So you as the reader, you perceive the text against a kind of expectation. So you go into reading Kevin Powers' The Yellow Birds. He is an American soldier invading Iraq, a sovereign nation. You must have expectations. You must have certain expectation that you think, oh, this is what this novel is about. I'm going to hate it, aren't I? You know, you might start with that, right? And then you're going to read Sinan Anton's The Corpse Washer, seen from the Iraqi civilian perspective, from inside Iraq, what's happening in Iraq at that time, the war-torn context. You probably feel like, oh gosh, I'm going to feel sad for the Iraqi, aren't I? So you must have certain expectations, right? Because you know the information, and based on the information, you are sympathetic towards maybe one or the other, right? So you are going to read against that set of expectation. You have to be mindful of that. This is something we as a reader, we need to be mindful of. Don't be carried away and say, okay, it's just a story. It is not just a story, unless you're reading it for pleasure, right? You're just reading it for pleasure. But otherwise, every story has some political ideologies embedded in it. The superior, the inferior, the dominant, the subaltern, right? So elements of hegemony, what Shizu talked about, you know, the cultural hedonism, cultural aphasia, cultural hegemony, it's all there in every text, in every story. You have to be mindful which culture is given dominance over another, right? We need to constantly be mindful. Who does the writer give dominance to or emphasis on, right? So these are things you have to be cognizant of, to be mindful of. So another thing about horizon of expectation is it claims that people within the culture share a common set of understanding about what's possible, probable, impossible. It is our shared, so there is a kind of a shared horizon, not doing a very straight line right now, okay. There's a kind of a shared horizon of expectation that makes mutual understanding possible. So there's certain things that we share. Should I kill another person? Is killing another person human? Or is that ethical? Is that allowed? There are certain things we share, right? Killing, taking someone else's life in whatever name, whether it's in the name of democracy or in the name of religion or in the name of nationalism, doesn't matter. But taking someone's life, an innocent life especially, is something none of us would think as is civil or humane or something that God wants from us. So there is something that is mutual. So that's just one example of the mutual horizon of expectation that both of you will have when you enter into the reading of these two novels. Okay, because there is certain kind of expectations based on your upbringing, based on your value system, right? So when you talk about horizon of expectation, it is made up of your worldview, your value system, maybe your morals, your religious values, right? As well as other aspects. But there are certain things that are shared. Even if Cherish and Elia come from two different cultures, two different religious background, nationalities, ideologies, but there are certain things that we share in common, right? So even if they are from different, people are from different cultures, we can still have a similar horizon of expectation. So this is something I want you to start thinking about when you're reading these two novels set in two different literary traditions, the American literary tradition, the Iraqi literary tradition, but both are from the same setting, right? War in Iraq in the first decade of 2000, right? The first few years of the 21st century. Okay, so the methodology then is, what is it that you focus on? You focus on the different types of horizon. Okay, there are many types of horizon. There are horizon of literary expectation, and then you've got the horizon of experience of everyday. Okay, so let's just unpack this quotation a little bit and see how we can use it to, can I erase this? I'm not terrible with my drawings. Yay, got erased. Okay, sorry. Okay, back to, okay, wanted to highlight, well, which one did I want to highlight here? Horizon of experience of everyday life. Okay. So the methodology of reading using horizon can be approached in two ways. Number one, firstly, and I quote, the narrow horizon of experience, the horizon of literary expectation. So the literary expectation is both novels are set in a war context, which means both are war narratives, right? Both are war narratives. So the first thing that you think about is, what other war narratives do I know? Maybe I've seen movies set in the context of war. Maybe I have read stories set in the context of war. So that is the narrow horizon of expectation, right? The focusing on the genre, war narratives. Okay. The second type, so the first type focuses on the genre, the literary style, the form of the novel, the way the story, the way war narratives are told. So it's not romantic. There are elements of the tragic, right? In a war context, in war narratives, there are elements of tragic. There will be deaths. All right, so if you go into the text and you think, oh my God, this is so sad, it's so tragic. Yeah, duh, because it's war narratives, right? Don't go in thinking there will be comedy, there will be romance, there will be happy ever after. This is not a comedy. This is not a romance. If it was a romantic genre, at the end of it, there will always be marriage of some kind. Right? Shakespeare's comedy are classic for that. There will be some kind of misunderstanding and everything will be resolved and then they will get married. All right, that's classic Shakespeare's comedy, right? And Shakespeare's tragedy, it starts off with the character being of a high standing, the hero being somebody from the high standing, and because of his hubris or his arrogance or his sense of self-conceit, he falls from grace. That is the usual trope of the tragedy. You think Macbeth, you think Hamlet, you think any of these tragedies, right? Even Oedipus Rex in the Greek tragedy. So when you think about horizon of literary expectation, that's the thing I want you to focus on. Okay. The second type of the second type of horizon that Jingfeng Zhang 2013 talks about is the horizon of experience of everyday life, right? So you as the reader, right? Remember he talked about the importance of the reader, right? How the reader must participate. The reader's participation is as important, right? So the horizon of the horizon of experience of everyday life includes the assumption, and I quote, assumptions of the whole social-cultural world of a community or an individual, whether as the author, initiated reader, the latter reader. So it goes outside the genre, outside the literary genre that you are reading. It includes society, culture, community, right? So we are focusing on both aspects when you think about the horizon. Okay, are you all right so far? Can you follow the discussion?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now open. If you have your if you have another device, that would be great. If not, just follow along. But the link that I sent, the Susan Bassnett book, the link that I sent, I'm going to start with that. Okay. So I'm starting by looking at page 12 and 13. I want to draw your attention to this person. I'm just going to pronounce his. I'm just going to pronounce his surname, Charles. When he talks about foreign literature compared in his inaugural speech in 1835. Of course, it's in French. He's talking about when you're making comparison between, say, a French work of art with another work of art from a foreign context. You talk about it in terms of the influence of thought. When you read one text, say for instance, you read, the quote that to use the example I said just now, William Shakespeare's tragedy, Macbeth, for instance. Shakespeare, when he wrote Macbeth, was influenced by literary traditions from Europe, right? He was influenced by by playwright from the continent. When he wrote his work, he was influenced by other writers. So when we talk about comparative literature within the context of influence, that's the kind of thing that scholars were talking about in the 19th century, mid-19th century. So same thing with, looking at, the theological aspect of from Germany, artistic aspect from Italy, the energetic aspect from France, the Catholic aspect from Spain, the Protestant aspect from England. So each nation was represented by something unique in that nation, right? And that uniqueness helped define that nation. And that uniqueness also became the aspect that influenced writers from other nations. Okay, are you following so far? So I'm picking up on this idea of influence. What does that mean? What does influence mean? And how can influence be used as a parameter to study text across time and space? Okay, so this is what Bassnett has to say about it. A key word is in that text is influence. Okay, this is from page 13. And indeed, the study of influences has always occupied an important place in comparative literature. The last couple of weeks when we were looking at comparative literature, the definition of comparative literature, how to approach it, what the different scholars have to say about it, Remack, other scholars like Tutosi and then Spivak and Susan Bassnett herself, the word influence keeps coming back. Right, so this is us unpacking. What does that mean when we think about influence? What does that mean? Okay. Charles, I'm butchering the name, also refers to the spirit of the nation, okay, or of the people. So one way to look at it is every nation had a kind of a spirit or something that they could contribute to the world at large. It could be it's religious. it is artistically inclined. It could be various aspects, right? It could be their political stance. It could be their ethics or their morals. But the nation had something that represented them. So that was the time when one nation, one language, one culture, one civilization. So it's almost like every nation had something that represented them at the world stage, right? And that nation then could influence someone else from another country by that spirit, by that contribution. Okay, so this is how the idea of influence can be studied. So I just want to kind of give you that aspect as a parameter. So, but if you think about it that way, if you think about it as, looking at the country as representative of one influence or one thing that they can influence, consider this scholar, Indian post-colonial writer by the name of Swapan Majumdar, who makes a suggestion that just like Westerners look at Asian writers and categorize them as Chinese literature, Indian literature, like they group they group that one writer's work as belonging to the entire literary canon. He suggests that in post-colonial position, we can also do the same with the West. Did I quote? Oh, this is so small. Sorry about this. So in complete contrast, and I like to quote Basnet a little bit, and then I want to quote what Majumdar says here. Okay. So in complete contrast, comparative literary studies in other parts of the world stresses the politicization of literature and rejects the formalist approach completely, right? So comparative literature, say in China, in India, in Africa, in other parts of the world, they want to politicize literature. They want to say literature, there is a kind of a political position that it takes, right? And but Majumdar argues that Indian literature and its relation to the East-West tradition, right, forms a community of what he calls sub-national literatures no less robust than the components of Western literature. So Majumdar is arguing that Indian literature is on equal footing, right? On equal footing. It's a sub-national literature because there are many literary traditions you cannot have one Indian literature because you have, hundreds and hundreds of languages and cultures and writing. So how do you categorize all of them as Indian literature? Right? When there are many languages. With English, with Greek, with Italian, it's just one language, one literature, one culture. It's easy. Whereas something like Indian literature, the continent is made up of communities and cultures with different languages and literatures, right? And yet, he says, it is on equal footing, is no less robust than Western literature. So here, this is the quote that I want to take from Majumdar. And I quote, Indian literature should be compared not with any single literature of the West, but with the concept of Western literature as a whole. Because that's what Indian literature is like. When you say Indian literature, when you say Chinese literature, it is the same as saying Western literature. That's his argument. That's the post-colonial stance, right? So don't be easily back to, I like what Shizu said, back to what Shizu said, the quote that Cherish picked up on. Don't be a tool for receiving information. You as post-colonial students, you need to engage your critical thinking and push back, right? So when Western scholars categorize the literature from this part of the world, from our part of the world, into one big lump, you know, Indian literature, Chinese literature, or Asian literature, you know, push back and say, look, if you want to categorize this as Indian literature, compare it with something called Western literature, then it's equal. Right? So if you want to break it down further into Italian, into French, into Greek, into German, then the Indian literature needs to be further categorized as well, because that's how complex it is. So this is something I want us to remember, to be mindful, okay? So back to our parameter, what is the approach to comparative literature for us? You know, how do we approach it when you compare two texts from two different contexts? Number one, the first thing to do is to give precedence, to give emphasis for non-Anglo-American literature. To begin by choosing a non-Anglo-American literature. So in our class, the choice is Sinan Antun's The Corpse Washer. I'm going to put that as the center. I'm not going to put Yellowbirds in the center. I'm going to put The Corpse Washer in the center. Okay? So we start by looking at The Corpse Washer. Why? This is in response to Macaulay's statement in 1835. Have a listen to this, okay? This is how the Orientalists, the imperialists viewed the Orient, India, you know, Saudi Arabia, the Middle East. This is how they viewed the people, the culture, the civilization of parts of this world that they colonized, okay? I have never found one among them, the Orients, who could deny that a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. Nobody could deny that. So he's saying that nobody can deny that European literary works is worth the entire collection of native literature of India and Arabia. Okay, this is how arrogant the colonialists, the imperialists were. So this is their view, that to them, there's nothing worth to read in this civilization. All right, so let's look at the rest of the quote. I have certainly never met with any Orientalists who ventured to maintain that the Arabic and Sanskrit poetry could be compared to that of the great European nations. So this is that mindset, all right? So the first thing, the first strategy for us, our first approach is, don't start with the text from the West, the Anglo-American literature. Begin by looking at literature from within your context. It could be Chinese literature, it could be Middle Eastern, it could be Indian, it could be African, it could be Malay, doesn't matter, right? It could be Malaysian writer. So give precedence over non-Anglo-American literature. Precedence of any other literature over non-Anglo-American. So that's our first strategy. Okay, so when you choose for your final project, begin on that premise. Second strategy. Begin also to dismantle this superiority stance. So remember what Shizu said, become a tool for thinking, not a tool for receiving information. So, you know, this is what Susan Bassnett has to say based on Macaulay's attack on the cultural heritage of the Middle East and the Indian subcontinent. Of course, she acknowledges that it is racist, and of course, she acknowledges it as absurd, right? But she also acknowledged that the underlying assumption, the unsaid, the silence in this statement is that this was a statement that was shared by others, by the imperialist. Right? This is not one man's opinion. This is the opinion of entire generation of colonialists, people who came and colonized, right? Even the 21st century, when you think about how a country like the US can invade a sovereign independent country like Iraq, that already tells you that an underlying assumption of that we are good, we are great, they are less than us, and we have to go in and help them out. The white man's burden, right? So even that, so that idea, that assumption is something we need to kind of dismantle, break apart. All right. So when Edward Fitzgerald translated Omar Khayyam's poetry, the classical poetry, this is what he said to a friend. It is an amusement to me to take what liberties I like with these Persians, who, as I think, are not poets enough to frighten one from such excursions, and who really do want a little art to shape them. So that kind of arrogance, Persia was a civilization long before England was even formed. Right? Persia, like China, like the Babylonians, they were, millennia ahead. But for them, for the whites, for the colonialists, the way they perceive, I mean, that statement is so racist, is so demeaning, right? He can take any liberty, he can do whatever he wants with these Persians, right? They're not really poets. Qayyum was not, Omar Qayyum was not really a poet. That's how contemptible he was, right? And he translated Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. So can you imagine if a translator had that kind of an opinion about the work he is translating? He is making that work accessible to others instead of translating it and seeing how beautiful the Persian civilization, language, and culture was, and how Omar Khayyam captured that beautifully. Instead of seeing it in that way, he had a very, slanted stance, or racist slanted stance, right? So I want you to remember this, that we need to dismantle this superiority held by the imperialists, even the imperialists in 21st century writings, okay? So how do we do that? We place the non-Anglo-American text in the center. You start by positioning your writing in the center. Okay? So implicit, this is Bassinet's words, implicit to comparative literature outside Europe and in the United States, it is the need to start with home culture and to look outwards, right? Exactly what Shizu said, focus from within China, right? So you see similarities being echoed by scholars from other schools of thought. So that aspect of the importance of not listening to others, focusing on what they are doing, but asking yourself, what is of value to me? What is of value to my community, to my society, to my nation, to my region, to my worldview, right? Begin from there and then find texts that are comparable that you can then compare to. Strategy number 4, how do we approach this? Ask yourself, what aspects of your nation is being celebrated? What aspects of the nation's excellence is being celebrated in that choice, in that text that you choose, right? So if you think about, and this is a quote from Bassinet's book again. I forget the page, but look for footnote 10, then you can see the page. So once again, Bassinet says, once again, the crux of the problem is how we perceive things, was one of perception. When you have texts like Shakespeare and you bring a play by Shakespeare to India, you start to assume that something like Shakespeare embodies the culture, the civilization, the virtues, the values of English. This sense that Shakespeare epitomizes Englishness, not this, not Fitzgerald's statements, right? Definitely not Macaulay's statement, right? But that's not the case. Shakespeare was just an artist, right? The way he wrote, the beauty of his language does not represent his nation. But that's the problem when you read Shakespeare and you think, oh, this is what English people are like. This is what English culture is like. All right. This is why the leader of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, says, you know, there's this thing called the two Englands, right? The England of these great writers like William Shakespeare, John Milton, you know, their noble speech, you know, their beautiful writing, their brave deeds, right? Of political revolution, the struggle for freedom, of science, of technical progress, you know, how their writing captures all those beautiful aspects, right? That aspect of England. Then there is this other England, the England of savage penal code, of brutal behavior, of entrenched feudalism. So you have to remember the writer does not represent the nation. So this is something we need to also be mindful of. So when you read Sinan Antun's The Corpse Washer, Kevin Powers, The Yellowbirds, you have to remember that the writer does not represent his nation. That's why I always use the phrase author-defined social reality. The author's social reality is of importance and it is captured in his or her writings. It is not the authority's social reality that is captured in the writer's writing. And it is not the everyday people's social reality that is captured in the writer's writing. It is the author's social reality. Okay, so I need you to kind of see the importance of how the writer represents a social reality through his writing, through her writing. Okay, the writer does not represent the nation, but the writer makes certain statements about the nation. I hope this is clear. If it's not, we can talk about it. And I think this is the final strategy. So the final strategy on how to approach comparative literature, the methodology, if you like. Okay, so we talked about choosing text. We talked about which text to put in the center, right? We talked about what you do when you read the text. You dismantle the Western superiority. You give your local context more precedence. You give your local or the text of your choice more precedence, not the Western one. And the fifth strategy, if you like, is you start with a definition of comparative literature that you want to use. You begin with the operational definition of comparative literature that you want to use. So Basnett's definition in the very first page of her book is very easy. Comparative literature involves the study of texts across cultures. It can be interdisciplinary, right? It is concerned with patterns of connection. It must be something that connects the literatures because they are from different cultures, from different contexts. There must be something that connects them, okay? And that connection crosses time and space, meaning it crosses geographical context. It crosses temporal context. Maybe one is in the 19th century, another one is the 21st century. But despite all these differences, there are patterns. There are patterns of similarities, patterns of connection that you see in the reading of these two novels. So this is the operational definition by Susan Basnett. So this is one operational definition. You get to decide which operational definition you want to use. And you use that operational definition for your reading approach. So the first parameter we talked about, comparative literature and national literary canon. So as I said, there are two novels in question. Both are war narratives. from two literary canon. The one, corpse washer. So I'm putting corpse washer in this as the first, right? One is Iraqi literary canon, 21st century war narrative. The Yellowbirds is the US literary canon, also 21st century war narrative. So whilst reading these two novels, I want you to ask what patterns emerge, right? What patterns emerge? What patterns of connection emerges as you read it? Okay, so as you read the stories, ask yourself, which characters am I focusing on? It could be the main character, it could be the minor characters. All right, which characters am I focusing on? Is it a female character? Is it a male character? Is it the central character? Is it the hero? Is it the minor characters? You know, so ask yourself these critical questions. So begin on this approach. Okay, so this is your assignment for week 7 after the mid-semester break. Okay, I want you to identify a theme. You may read the text. After this, I'll show you two examples. You may look at that as examples of how to read the novel. You may begin by identifying the theme. As you finish reading the Sinan Antun's Corpse Washer, then you can ask yourself, okay, what is it about this novel that caught my attention? What do I want to talk about when it comes to this novel? Then ask yourself, which character caught my attention? Okay, Corpse Washer, there are the central character is Jawad. There is his father, there is his girlfriend, there is his mother, there is his school teacher, there is so many minor characters. So which character caught your attention? Okay, because you're reading the story, remember what Hans Robert Giles says. It's the active participation of the addressee. That is the key. What you see in the text, that is the key, not what you read in the reviews. You know, you go online, you read what other people have to say. You may even go online and because there are some interviews I've posted on UKM Folio. You may watch Sinan Anton's interview, you may watch Kevin Powell's interviews, and you may listen to him and listen to them and say, oh, this is what the author thinks I should focus on. But remember, you as the reader, that is key. Your active and critical participation, that's the key. So when you read the story, if your attention gravitates towards a particular character or a particular issue, focus on that, follow that. Don't follow what other people's focus is. Okay, so that's our approach. Okay. So what are you interested in? What are you drawn to? Okay. Then ask yourself, how does that novel, Sinan Antun's The Corpse Washer, how does that novel converge with The Yellowbirds? How is it similar? Okay, so in both contexts, both novels, I want you to take like 4 or 5 excerpts, and then you will analyze how they converge and how they diverge. You will analyze for the patterns of connection between the two literatures. That's the focus. So final thoughts for this week is, number one, you as a reader, you need to establish the connection with the works. When you read a novel, in this case, 2 novels, The Corpse Washer, The Yellowbirds, when you read the novels, you need to have a connection with the text. And if your connection is something other people don't see or other people don't share, even better. That's what makes it original, right? And then bring your expectations with your reading, meaning look, I have certain expectation. Okay, I don't expect people to be abusive. I don't expect people to go and invade another country. I don't expect people to ignore their dead bodies, people who have died. I expect that's my culture, right? In my culture, when somebody dies, you give them the right respect. You perform the right rituals. You perform the rites on them, and you bury them, because that is the God. That is what our God tells us. This is what God tells us. This is my responsibility. So the responsibility of those who are living on those who have died is as important as the responsibility to take care of people who are alive. So that's my expectation. So when I read The Corpse Washer, how does my expectation connect me to that story? Okay, so that's one way of looking at it. Now, Cherish comes from a very different cultural background. So when you come from your background, Cherish, and you read Sinan Anton's The Corpse Washer, you may make connection in terms of how is this the culture of washing the dead body, even if the dead body is just a head, right? Somebody brings in a head to be washed in this, that's a scene in the story. Even if it's just a head, you have to give the body, you have to give that person the last rites: wash properly, clean properly, shroud it, put it into a piece of cloth, shroud it, and then allow the family to bury the head, the body, right? So that is the Islamic culture. How is this different from your culture? So bring that expectation when you're reading the text. So this is the tutorial task. This is task number 3. Okay, this is graded. Okay, this is the assignment that you are supposed to do. Identify any theme that can be used to analyze the corpse washer and the yellowbirds. Compare and contrast how the two writers, Sinan Antun and Kevin Powers, use their respective narratives to convey the theme you identify. Okay, so any questions so far?
Dr. Rai, for question number 1, just now, the tutorial task, for the theme, do we identify like different themes for the two novels or one same theme?
It has to be similar.
Okay.
The theme is what connects the two
All right.
novels.
Okay.
That identification is a very good question. The identification of the theme is what Susan Bassnett talks about. Susan Bassnett talks about in terms of patterns of connection. You begin on the premise of the connection, and the connection, the first parameter, the connection is thematic. That's the first parameter. So one way of approaching comparative literature is to find the same theme with the same context of war narrative set in the same setting. So there are lots of patterns of connection already, right? So you must begin on the theme, the similar theme. It's a good question. Any other question?
No, but I just have a question for assignment 1.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do we submit it on UKM folio or?
Yes.
Yes.
I will open a link for that.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. So starting week 7, 6, 7 onwards, that's the kind of approach we will have. Okay. Just to kind of get you started on I know you haven't even finished the first assignment. I'm already getting you started on the second assignment. But what you do for your e-task number 2, sit here, there's e-task 2. Then the next two novels you read, e-task 3, and then you have e-task 4 and e-task 5. Every e-task, you are given an opportunity to do a short analysis of the two novels that you have read. Then, based on the e-task that you have been given, 2 and 3, you can choose to expand on any one, e-task 2 or e-task 3, for your second assignment. That's how it builds, right? So I give you a task, a short task for yellow birds and is it yellow birds or yellow bird? I keep calling it yellow bird. Let me just check. Yeah. Terrible. Yeah, sorry. Okay, apologies for that. Okay, so, you may start by saying, look, I've read The Yellow Birds and the Corpse Washer, and I like both novels, and I've done my e-task too. I want to expand that for my second assignment. Can. Or you want to look at, or you've read The Hate You Give, Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, and you want to, and you've done e-task 3 for week, there will be week 8 then. And you've done the e-task 3, and then you realize that I really like these two novels. I want to expand on it for the second assignment, for seminar, also can. Or you've got two other novels or two other texts that you have worked on and you want to bring that in for second assignment, also can. But my suggestion is to work smart. Okay. Now I'm just going to say a little bit about the assignment. I don't want to scare you too much because you're still working on your video essay, but sometimes it helps to think long term. So okay, the novels I'm reading, how far can I take it? Okay. So the second assignment is a seminar. Don't worry about that. We'll come back to the format of the assessment after the mid-semester break. But what is the text? What is the assignment asking from you? Using any two texts set in two separate national canon, examine the above mentioned theme. So notice I'm focusing on the first parameter, theme, right? What is the theme? Comparative literature and national literary canon. Simple, straightforward, right? You can use the text from week 6. You can also use text from week 7. So it means you can use the same two novels that you do for e-task 2 and e-task 3, but you must expand on it. You cannot use the same information or same assignment and then submit. This e-task is about 4 marks. So it's just maybe a page and a half, maybe like 500 words, something like that. The seminar is about 20 minutes. So it expands, it gives you more room to expand your statements or your arguments that you make in the e-task. Okay, so it's the same focus based on e-task 2 and e-task 3. Okay, so my recommendation for you is, because you have 2 weeks, next week is week 6. Next week is week 6. The week after is mid-semester break. So you have mid-semester break. What are the dates? 9 till the 13th. 9 till 13 April. May.
Dr. Rai, does that mean we have 2 weeks of holiday?
Exactly.
Oh, okay. I thought just 1 week.
No, because they have made, the university has made next week as week 6, not as mid-semester break.
Oh,
so you have 2 weeks break. Yes, you have 2 weeks break. So my recommendation is for you to finish reading all 4 novels. Finish reading all 4 novels in these 2 weeks. Okay, that way, when you come back, that would be week 8. When you come back, we will do comparative literature and national literature canon. You do your e-task. The following week, we go straight into comparative literature and voices from the margins. I would expect you to have read the 2 sets of novels. Okay?
Okay.
And when you read the novels, do exactly the same thing. Approach it in the same way. Do exactly the same thing. Identify the theme. What aspect of the novel are you focusing on? Which character, which scene, right? How does the other novel you choose converges with this one? So you've got The Hate You Give, you've got Born a Crime, same approach. You've got The Corpse Washer, The Yellow Birds, same approach, right? So one is from the Iraqi canon, another one is from the US canon. One is from the South African canon, another one is from the US canon. So the approach that we take thematically, the parameter of thematic approach is exactly the same. But as I said, one is war narratives, right? Yeah. One is war narrative, right? One set is war narrative. The other set is the experience of being marginalized. Okay, The Hate You Give, Born a Crime, the perspective, the expectation is very much on the issue of marginalization, what it means to be marginalized in that context in the US and in South Africa. Okay. Right, any other question? So I highly recommend that you rewatch this video. Please download once the class is over. Please download it because the videos are not kept for long. So any of the videos that you find useful, immediately download it once it's rendered on our team's channel. Download it. You can save it. You know, watch it many times. And if you have any questions, like maybe you watch this again, and you've got some questions, message me. Please message me. Okay, I will also be downloading it and uploading it on my YouTube channel and sending the link to you via WhatsApp, and you can follow, inshallah. But personally, I recommend that you download it yourself as well for your own safekeep. Okay, so that's a lot. I've given you all a lot today, I realize, but I feel that once you start to read the 4 novels, things will make more sense to you. You know, so always remember the focus should be on you, the reader, and your active participation. So when you read the novel, ask yourself, who am I focusing on? What aspect of the story am I focusing on? And follow that. Use that as your guide in your reading. Okay? Cherish, okay? Alia, okay?
Okay.
All right, brilliant. So thank you for making time for this lecture. And I'm sorry I couldn't give this lecture after your assignment. The ideal would have been you finish your assignment 1, your hats are like your head are clear, you know, you've got hats off for assignment 1. Now we can start with the parameters, but we can't because next week is a holiday. But the glass is always half full, I think, you know, there is always something good. And the good is that now you can start reading the novels during your vacation time and read it actively. Make notes, you know, I should show you my yellow birds. It's in my the other office. I've got stickers, I've got highlights, I've got like all sorts of things, you know, but now I start reading on the iPad, so I highlight it differently. But engage when you're reading something, ask questions as you're reading it. Like, what does this mean? Why is he putting it this way? What happened? You know, engage, be an active reader. Okay, and have questions that we can engage with when you come back from your vacation. Okay, and make sure you come back from your vacation. Okay, right. Right, so if there's nothing else, I will stop the recording. Thank you so much for the wonderful session. I hope this is beneficial, and I hope you will use it to start, actively studying text in a comparative fashion.
Thank you so much, Doctor.